is a sport that I gave up after the 2003 World Cup. Uh, I saw Jawaharlal Srinath bowl to Ricky Ponting. I'm like, fuck this, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. And that was that.
But yeah,
Beautiful.
we are super excited to have you on. We'll keep it short. We'll probably keep it to the similar length of your Red Inker podcast, which I follow. Super fan of that before I get started.
Oh,
Uh,
cheers.
Man, all of the cricket friends I have lost their shit when they said you were coming on our show, and like, and I'm like, am I the only guy that's more interested in the Aaron Sorkin part of Jared Kimber's line of interest than the cricket part? Because I can't wait to talk about that. But let's see if we have time.
Yeah, no worries. Let's go.
All right, let's go.
all right. Cool.
Oh, sorry. Is this video or audio or both?
Both.
But
I won't pick my nose.
I'll try not to. Oops. There you go.
all right. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Triangle of Fence. I'm Monish and I'm joined by my usual co-host Nishant. But today we also have a special guest with us, Jared Kimber. For
How you doing?
cricket lovers, he probably needs no introduction. One of the finest content creators, YouTuber, podcaster, blogger, call it whatever you want. He's donned many hats. He's also a sports analyst, he's a media consultant, commentator, and I can do an entire episode of the number of things he's done. But for today, I'll just say that he's also a Denver Nuggets fan, and we'll talk a little bit about that an episode. But first of all, welcome to our show, Jared. Super excited to have you on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Great. Now you're from Australia. You probably grew up watching cricket and Steve Waugh and Mark Waugh and all of that. But how did the NBA happen and why Denver Nuggets of all teams? Because it's not a city that LeBron James would pick to go. It's not something that
Ouch.
big stars want to go. They've not really won a lot. Before this year, they were not last relevant in what, 2009 or something?
Mellow. Yep.
Yeah.
So why NBA? How the NBA started? How did the NBA start for you, and why Denver Nuggets?
It's important to know how big basketball is in Australia. It's
Mhm.
yeah, it's always been a very big sport in Australia. My nan grew up in the 1920s and she played basketball. So basketball got to Australia and especially Melbourne at a very early time, way earlier than it did, way before it was a global game. For whatever reason, it landed in Melbourne. And it sort of petered along in Melbourne until about the 1980s, and it started to have a bit of a boom. And then when the NBA started actively, realizing that there was an audience in Australia that liked basketball, they really pushed it, and it felt like we had two huge booms in Australia in the 80s. One was golf and one was basketball. And at one stage, they couldn't build enough golf courses for all the people who wanted to play golf, and they couldn't build enough basketball courts for all the people who wanted to play basketball. It was just a huge thing. Even going back before the boom, when I was about 6 or 7, you guys might, depending on how hardcore you guys are, there's a guy called Dante Exum who played for Utah, and I think was he with Cleveland, I think most recently. So his father came to my school in 1987 to do a basketball clinic.
Wow.
Cecil Exum, incredible flat top, undersized big man, if I remember correctly. He didn't even play top level Australian basketball that much. He usually played in the second division, the state division. But he obviously came over as a professional and knew a lot about basketball. And him and my PE teacher, who was a professional athlete as well, they did a slam dunk contest against each other. And it was those sorts of things. I watched Ben Simmons's father play. Jonah Bolden, who I think might have just been let go by Philly. I watched his father play. Do you know what I mean? Like all these guys came over and they played. And if you think about it, Melbourne has had Andrew Bogut, Ben Simmons, 2 number 1 picks. Lauren Jackson is from, we could say she's from Victoria. She's really from New South Wales, but she's basically on the border. So another top level basketballer. Dante Exum went 5 in the draft.
Yeah.
When it comes to basketball, I think there's been a few, Andrew Gaze obviously won a title with the Spurs. So it was always a very big thing. And so we sort of played it at school and played it, sometimes with our friends. And I think maybe by the time I was about 10, I had a ring in the backyard, just like a mud pit, like almost like an old Indiana movie set. It looked like it was ridiculous that I ever played basketball on it. But we a lot of my friends played. My dad was very anti-basketball because he saw it as American. And he hated Americans. Mind you, he also hated the English and had no problem with cricket. But so I played almost every sport up until the age of 12, except for basketball. And once I got to about 12 or 13, I just started playing. And got to an okay level. I was like a 3-and-D guy, except I couldn't really shoot threes, which wasn't as handy.
That's Gary Harris.
Yeah, a little bit like Danny Harris. I was very good on defense. I could quite often I would play all 5 positions on defense. I'm not that tall, but I was quite tall when I was young. So literally, our team would just say we would play 4-man zone and 1-man 1-on-1, and I would just run around on the opposition's best player. But all my basketball was really from playing in the backyard and playing street basketball. So I didn't really understand the plays. So they just sort of used me as if I was open, they would fling me the ball because I could shoot from about 16 to 12 feet. And on defense, no one could get past me. So, whether I'd be playing on a 6'8" guy one week who was about to go play college basketball, and the next week I'd be playing on a 5'5", speed demon, but they just figured that I would stick with these players. So basketball was there. The Denver stuff is a bit weird. I don't really remember how it happened. Basketball cards had a big boom in maybe the early 90s, 1991, I think, around the world. And Melbourne was no different. We all started collecting them. And I think for a lot of us, that was maybe a gateway towards the NBA because we're already playing basketball and watching it. But I think what happened was around that time, it might have been that you could get the rookie cards and would have been, what was it, Fleet, and what was the other one? There was 3, wasn't there? Upper Deck, Fleet, and whatever the third one was. And one of them had like the rookie cards, and it must have been Larry Johnson might have gone number 1 for Charlotte, and Dikembe Mutombo, was he number 5 maybe? I should know that. And like when you go through it and you're reading the stories, and you're like, wait, this guy's from Africa, and then straight away they got me interested in him. And then the first time I saw, they must have shown clips of him because I think it was quite a big story for the NBA at that time. They were really trying to promote him a lot. And obviously he was, as we now know, 20 years of him playing later, he was quite a character. So they would stick cameras on him quite a lot. And I loved playing defense, as I said. And he was this guy who you couldn't score on because he would block everything. And at that stage, I probably, whatever it was it 92? So I was about 12. I, usually played 4 or 5 and tried to block every shot that was anywhere near my area. And he was a guy who blocked at a higher rate than Hakeem Olajuwon. So I just got obsessed with him, and he went to Denver, and I sort of stuck with that.
There it is.
And then I never really left. I do really like Detroit as well because again, defense, and I missed the Bad Boys era. So I'm one of those people who's always, I was looking back, I miss that. And then, of course, when they had the Wallaces, suddenly they were an incredible defensive force again. And I actually, my claim to fame with some of my friends is basically, we did a tour of America at one time, and I watched a documentary on ESPN about what Joe Dumas was doing with Detroit. And I literally went straight back home to Australia and put a bet on Detroit to win the championship. Because I was like, if what he's trying to do works, I don't see how they won't win the championship. And I won a shit ton of money. On a very small bet. I can't remember what they were. They were like 35 to 1 or 50 to 1 for the championship. Yeah. And I absolutely stuffed, and I got them, very early on. And a friend of mine played college ball, and now I'm friends with a few basketball writers. But yeah, Detroit is certainly. I still love Detroit, but Denver is the team. It got harder and harder to love Denver. So I never really warmed to Carmelo at all, except for Hoodie Mello. I did like, but that was a bit later on. And I loved Iverson, but it just seemed like they weren't going to win. But I suppose the last era that I really watched would probably be when Antonio McDyess was still good. That incredible story of where he should have gone to a better team, did go to a better team, and then came back to Denver for no reason, which is always one of my favorite things. And, I think, for me, Denver was on the back burner a little bit. And you've got to remember too, when I moved to the UK, it was 2007. It was just the point that Denver was getting really good again. But it was very hard to watch the NBA in the UK at that time. You've got the worst possible time zone, probably even worse than India's time zone for watching basketball. And then you've got just other little things like it's a hugely popular participation sport in the UK. But you wouldn't know that if you ever turned on a TV ever. You wouldn't know that Luol Deng played in the NBA. John Amici gets a little bit more credit because he's, eloquent. But but realistically, they don't talk much about their UK players. It wasn't on TV much. Sky didn't show it much, and Sky was like the way you watch sport in the UK back then. And that was before sort of NBA TV became a big thing and all that sort of stuff. And so I just sort of followed it from the background. And then when the 3-point boom happened, it was around the same time I was doing the big analytics kick on cricket. Right. And I was suddenly like, there's something going on here that's quite interesting. So I'm going to look at this. And it was probably, Steph Curry and Houston that got me sort of back into basketball. And once I got back into basketball, I took one look at Jokic and I was like, well, that's my favorite player of all time. I mean, that's ridiculous. Yeah. On offense, if I could have been any good, that's the kind of player I would have wanted. I had this incredible ability in basketball to only be able to pass the ball out of the low post. And nowhere else on the court. Anywhere else on the court, I was a walking turnover. In the low post, I suddenly turned into, this incredible feeder of the ball. And then to watch Jokic do that and the way he plays. So once I saw him, I was back in on Denver 100%. But, my son, even before that, had a Dikembe Mutombo top. And I still had my Jalen Rose, kit out the back. And, I think I've got a basketball card of LaFonso Ellis, and I still remember Rodney Rogers and, Antonio McDyess. And a friend of mine is in the US, and he was telling me where he was studying. And I was like, that's Bryant Stiff's university. For him just to have a complete blank back at me. But those are, those sorts of guys, Robert Pack and all that, that was very much my era. Although, being the sort of person I am, I know about Alex English and the run and gun guys before that, Dan Issel and all that sort of stuff. But really that 90s era was when I was the most strong Denver until now, really. And now I've got NBA TV and kind of re-obsessed with it the way that I get obsessed with things.
I have, throughout that, I'm also the biggest Kobe nut around. So every second thing you said, I'm thinking, how does this relate back to Kobe? Because you're saying Mutombo, I remember that dunk. You're saying McDyess, and this is a bit of a stretch, but NBA 2003, if anyone's ever tried that, EA Sports. The first thing I did on any Lakers squad was bring in McDyess and just make all of them crossover dunk. Because it was ridiculous. You hit alt, you hit enter, and he dunks. And
he was probably almost the best dunker in the game then, wasn't he? And it was funny. He lost his athleticism, became a really good sort of stretch four, really, which is quite interesting. But when he started, I just remember, he took over from Sean Kemp, didn't he? Really, the ability to jump, just a phenomenal basketball. If he played now, if he was coming through now, his talents would be worth probably 2 or 3 times what they were. But back in those days, I remember there were years where he'd average 15 points a game. And you think about that now, a guy who can jump over the backboard and shoot from the outside, he would just be worth an absolute fortune. But yeah, also famous for the only guy who actually actively chose Denver.
That's actually, wow, I never looked at it that way. Yeah, pretty much. And this ties back pretty neatly to why Lakers for us, right? Monish, I don't think he knows really who he supports. He's one of those playing it safe. I'll stay neutral for the love of the sports guys for now. For now, let's see how that goes. But Lakers for me was very simple. 1998, I was 8 years old. I had a pretty strict curfew and a bedtime that my parents enforced, and I just loved breaking that curfew. I loved just the concept of staying up past allowed hours. And for me, the first gateway to that was the 98 FIFA World Cup, because it was in Europe. So it would kick off a little late night in India. Some like 10:30, 11 was when pre-game would start. So that was my excuse. So I started watching football, and that's also how Manchester United, they won the treble that year. Can't go wrong. And then the next year, NBA, and this was telecast in India, the games were so sparsely spread out, you'd hardly get any games live. And it was almost always the Lakers. For some reason, not the Bulls. I don't know why, because this was around about the Last Dance Bulls. So 99 Lakers, I watched Kobe. I'm like, damn, this guy's good. And then Shaq, as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old who doesn't really have any appreciation for nuance, how can you not like Shaq? So I saw this thing, and then this was a juggernaut for 3 years in a row. And I'm like, all right, this is my team. And then, boy, did I not know the misery that was coming in the years to come. Starting with that Detroit team and Billups hitting all those shots and Ben Wallace just a menace, and stuck through it. Finally was rewarded when Pau showed up and they picked up 2 more chips, and then misery again watching, oh God, Nick Young and all of those morons trying to play basketball. And that's where it's funny when you say not many people would realize Luol Deng played in the NBA. I think the Lakers of all people would be painfully reminded every single day that Luol Deng played in the NBA because they're still picking up his dead contract.
They tried to get rid of it, didn't they? Recently. There's Brian Curtis wrote a really good piece about Australian basketball fans when he was in Melbourne a couple of years ago for the Ringer, and he was saying it's really interesting how many of us have very random tastes. So and you notice someone who's spends most of his life with Indian friends and Indian people on Twitter. Right. For whatever reason, Indians seem to gravitate towards the most obvious sort of Manchester United and Arsenal and Chelsea and these sorts of teams. Whereas if you look at Australian basketball fans, I was Denver. My cousin was San Antonio, and this is before San Antonio were anything. He just liked David Robinson, so he was San Antonio. My other mate was Orlando. The other guys in his family, I think, were, I better get this right. They'll be so upset. But I think they were Philly because of Weatherspoon, right? And it's even Melinda Farrell, the cricket writer, she came to basketball recently and picked Toronto before they won the championship again. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like Australian, when it comes to Australians, there's Kane Pittman who works for The Athletic, who's a Milwaukee Bucks fan. And when I found out that he was like the Milwaukee Bucks podcaster guy, I was just like, that makes complete sense. Of course it would be some random guy from Australia, because other than people in Milwaukee, who the fuck would care about the Milwaukee Bucks? I remember meeting, Patrick Steegman is like the head of ESPN.com, and everyone else is meeting him for Cricinfo and like, ooh, this important guy. And I found out that he was a beat writer for the Bucks. And I was like, tell me everything you can about Vin Baker. And he's like, how do you know who this is? And I was like, I need a lot of Milwaukee Bucks fans. The more you can tell me about Glenn Robinson, the better our relationship will be. So Patrick, he went to an IPA game, and in the break, we were literally in the bar, as you get when you're with the boss, in the corporate seats, and and I'm just drilling him about 90s Milwaukee Bucks facts and all this sort of nonsense. So it is funny how, for whatever reason, Australian basketball fans always did that. So I don't think me supporting Denver is as weird as it would be perhaps if I was from, if I was from another part of the world. But in Australia, I think picking the most random team you can and then being obsessed about them for years to come is just kind of what we do.
That's an interesting take. In fact, I was going to throw this to Monish. The Indians picking the obvious teams. I think there's a whole amount of truth to that, and it's just always the winners. And I don't think you can really overcomplicate this into some kind of psychometric understanding of the Indian sports fans' average psyche or a model personality. I think, at least for me, it was quite simply down to these were the only teams that were even being telecast. Like the big names would get picked up. Yeah. It wasn't even the EPL.
It could be as simple as that, couldn't it?
Yeah. Like in the late 90s.
Well, I mean, the other one is if you look at Indian tennis, literally, oh my God. I did a thing recently where I said any young sports writer can send me a piece. I got 134 pieces. 30 pieces on Roger Federer. 29 of those were from people from India or Pakistan. Now, I recently talked to a famous Pakistani writer about that, and she goes, "No, I just love him, and it's not because I'm Asian." And I said, "I'm not even asking that. I'm trying to work out why this has happened. Is it something to do with the way that you said all Lakers seem to be on every week? Is it something to do with the way that these things are broadcast?" So we had, and Usman Samiuddin, another legendary cricket writer, we were talking about, because he was quite a basketball fan when he was younger. We got into basketball through the NBA used to give you one free game a week to certain overseas markets, and the NBA, whatever it is, what was the TV show? NBA with Ahmad Rashad. I always forget the name of it.
Was it the Countdown? NBA Action, I think it was.
Yeah, NBA Action. That's it. Yeah. Right. We got through that. So you would get Dikembe Mutombo and Sean Kemp and, sort of random people on there. And then also the game might be, you get some of the bigger teams, but you would get San Antonio Phoenix. And you would get the Knicks a lot and the Lakers a lot and the Bulls a lot, but you would also get Houston, Orlando, and those sorts of games. Perhaps that just didn't happen in Asia, and perhaps a similar thing with that sort of the rush of tennis as well. And so that, you know, people are just like pumping out Manchester United games and games and Federer and all that sort of stuff. And it might just be as simple as that. But as someone from the outside who obviously, you know, has spent a great deal of his life, you know, living with and around Indians and has been to India a bunch of times, it is incredible how sort of uniform the selections are, where, you know, in Australia, you'll meet a basketball fan and, you know, they'll be like, well, I was a Vancouver Grizzlies fan. And just like, why were you, what? How did that happen? You know, show me on the doll where the bad man touched you. But, you know, it's, you know, those sorts of things seem to happen. And that, I don't think that's a cultural thing as much as possible. It might just be it might be a cultural thing or it might be a TV thing, but it's certainly something that I have noticed as a man around India.
No, you're absolutely right. Actually, that ties in well with what I wanted to ask you next, right? We have this new concept of a modern fan, which are very player focused rather than, say, a team focused fan, right? Like you supported Denver Nuggets all your life without having any reason to. But nowadays you have fans supporting whichever teams LeBron James plays for, or even when it comes to other sports, they support Pune, Rising Pune Super Giants because Dhoni plays for them, and then they switch back to Chennai when they're back in the IPL, or a AB de Villiers fan, or something like that. So, is there a true concept of a true fan? Is there something called a true fan where you pick a team and stick by them, whether you win or lose? Or
what does that evolve to today? The definition of you're not a glory hunter, you're a true blue old school fan.
Yeah, I think you guys have to understand how much the world has changed, though. I mean, we are doing a basketball podcast with three people who didn't grow up in America, in three different time zones while we talk to each other. You know, if you're Manchester United, then you'll be more than well aware of how Manchester United fans feel about about their fans not being from Manchester, right? And the City fans used to be even more, you know, full on about that,
right?
And so we don't live in that world anymore, and we also have more options as a fan. You know, when we were growing up, you said 1998, so I'm a little bit older than you guys. I was sort of learning to support the sporting teams that I like between 1985 and 1993, between the age of about 5 and 13, right? At that stage, I did only have access to what I had access to. You know, I didn't know, you know, if I didn't know about the cities and I didn't know about the culture. It never even occurred to me as a 11 or 12-year-old that Denver had never been good before. Like, you know, little things like that. If they seemed to be putting together a bunch of basketballers that I really liked, and my favorite basketballer was there, so I followed that team. But I'm not from Denver. I've never been to Denver. In fact, I've been to Colorado. Weirdly, my friend played basketball in Lamar, so I spent some time in Lamar, which, you know, there's no reason to ever go to Lamar unless you know someone there. At a Walmart is all I remember. So, you know, the whole concept of that has completely changed. The other thing is that probably up until the internet, I think that you would pick a team and follow that team because they were your team. Once the internet came along and you have the access to follow James Harden's Instagram feed and know everything you can about a player, and who was I forget which one, who was the Milwaukee Bucks guy who was like making videos about photography and stuff and all that sort of stuff. Like if you're a young kid, I could see how you'd be hooked on him and all those sorts of things and coming through. And I think that it has definitely changed. I mean, if we talk about Asia specifically, the amount of people who tweet me with the little Ronaldo symbol in their Twitter handle from Asia is phenomenal. So I can understand why you might be more hooked with him. Also, we know so much more about sports now. Like we know that it's kind of nonsense, and you know, this whole thing of team loyalty. I don't know when team loyalty died, but I tell you what, when teams are as loyal as they need to be to the next win, and once we kind of worked out that athletes work that out for themselves, it probably changes it psychologically for us. You know, and maybe it was LeBron who did it, you know, in one particular sport that has gone out throughout the whole world. But we got to a certain point where we're like, I mean, when LeBron did that, I remember being on Twitter, and I didn't tweet much about basketball in those days, but tweeting it and just going, guys, he's going to win a championship, and no one's going to give a shit.
Correct. Yeah.
He's just going to win like a bunch of championships, and no one's going to give a shit that he didn't do it the right way. You know, someone like Stephen A. Smith will yap and yap and yap about it, but realistically, in the long run, no one cares. No one cares that Kevin Durant did that. Everyone still thinks Kevin Durant and LeBron James are the two best players in the NBA, right? Absolute nonsense to think, you know, kind of anything else. And I think that once you learn a lot about the sport, and maybe the advent of fantasy sport played a part, but the advent of the internet,
right,
you kind of realize the players have to look after themselves. I mean, if you want to bring it back to Denver, Jeremy Grant has made a horrible decision if he ever wants to win an NBA title by leaving Denver. Now, I don't know if Denver would have won, but if you look at, we didn't, but you're saying money, but he got offered the same money from Detroit, by Denver. Yeah. He got offered $20 million per season by Denver and $20 million for Detroit.
Yeah.
Now, why did he pick Detroit? Because essentially he can be the number 1 or 2 ball usage guy over there. And he's like, that's what I want to be. Now that's fine. And we now accept that. Had that happened 3 or 4 years ago, I think, maybe 10 years ago, I think everyone would have been like, what on earth has happened here? But we now understand that Jeremy Grant is like, look, I could have won a championship, but I actually think I can be a better basketballer if I leave Denver and I become the center of an offense. Now, he could be wrong, and he could have made a horrible mistake. But to be fair, what is Jeremy Grant doing? He is betting on himself.
Yeah,
he's making a decision based on what he thinks is best for him and his basketball. And he obviously thinks he can average 22 points a night and be the main man on a rebuilding team that perhaps can become quite good.
Yeah,
I think he's wrong, and he's probably given up a chance of winning a championship. And in 5 years' time, he'll look back and just go, oh, I made a mistake, especially when if any one of Bol, MPJ or RJ Hampton come off, and he's going to be looking back at that starting lineup going, that's an NBA winning starting lineup. But I don't think there was a few Denver fans that were upset, and there's certainly a few basketball people that needed convincing from Jeremy Grant as to why he did it. But once we understood, I think we all went, oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
10 years ago, everyone would have been like, no, team first, team first, team first.
Yeah.
Denver Nuggets don't care about Jeremy Grant. They're just an organization trying to make their next win. And I think fantasy sports, the internet, the fact that we know how the sausage is made, all those sorts of things now, we now understand that if you're James Harden, and Steph Curry might be next, and Giannis is not far away, and you get to, 30, and your team, or 32, and your team isn't going anywhere, you're just like, why would I spend 2 years here putting up numbers? I know I can put up numbers. I now want to win a championship. And if you're Jeremy Grant, you might be like, yeah, I've got more of a chance of winning a title in Denver over the next couple of years, but they've still got to get past LeBron.
Yeah.
In 4 years' time, I might have created something incredible with Detroit, and I'll be a better player, and I'll be the best basketballer that I can be. I'm going to back myself. And I just think that all of that has seeped through to fans. Fans now get that. You now have a brand, brands with players, and, players have their own, social media and all those sorts of things that weren't available. It makes sense, I think, for young sports fans to sort of do that. And then you've got the fact that if you're from fucking Hyderabad, what connection do you have with the Bay Area or with Los Angeles? And so if your favorite player leaves, it doesn't matter. And,
it's easy to put. Yep.
I still liked Denver after Dikembe left, but him leaving meant that I straight away had to be interested in Atlanta and Philly and wherever the fuck else he bounced around for many, many different years, right? And I had to. So straight away, even though I think I had a Rodney Rogers, jersey, and I had a Jalen Rose jersey, and I had a Denver jacket. I never had any of that stuff with Dikembe's other teams, but straight away, I'd been opened up as a fan. And I think those sorts of things happen right across the board now, even more so. And if you've got a league where you sign a Supermax 5-year contract and you can be traded almost from the first day, why would you not move on?
Yep.
Totally. You've worked as an analyst for multiple franchises, right? Across the Caribbean Premier League, the Big Bash, and all of that. I wanted to ask you, how much analysis is too much? Because nowadays you see a bunch of guys on their laptops, not even following the game, whispering something into the coach's ears, make this move, analyzing the strengths, weaknesses, what are the better matchups and all of that. But sometimes you have old school coaches who just prefer the eye test and want to stick to their tried and tested and proven method. They're sometimes rigid about making those new or listening to an analyst, right? Now, as an analyst, have you faced such instances, and where do you draw the line of, okay, you can suggest this, but sometimes you got to, or how do you get a buy-in from a coach? Right?
Yeah, the buy-in conundrum, really. Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly not too much analysis. You can't do too much analysis unless you're doing it wrong. Yeah. You can probably try and give too much to players and coaches because there's only so much they can take. And, my running joke is I'm trying to, explain regression to the mean and algorithms to guys who still have Hotmail accounts, right? Who've never worked in an office before, who don't understand graphs in some cases. And, had a big fight with a couple of people, major people in cricket a couple of years ago when I said that they shouldn't have even been shortlisted for jobs because they didn't understand all this stuff. And we're not in a position in cricket where these things are out there. Like, I would say most NBA coaches could give you a brief understanding of what PER is, right? They might not be able to explain, or probably even a better one would be, true economy. So that's my one that I stole from basketball. Yeah. True shooting, which I stole for cricket because it works for cricket as well. So, a slightly different metric, but essentially, if you're trying to deal with them, it's very, very softly. I think that there's more talked about top level analytics than there is actually people on the ground using it at a certain point. But what happens is, I remember an interview with Greg Popovich. Greg Shippard coached Victoria in cricket, not even in basketball. I forgot to tell you the other fun fact. Brett Brown was the coach of my NBL team in Melbourne. He's North Melbourne Giants coach. So I was interested in Philly up until 5 minutes ago. But yeah, so I remember Greg Popovich giving an interview and basically saying he didn't like 3-pointers. And so for him, that wasn't real basketball. He grew up before the 3-point era. He understood why it happened and everything. And he said, but when it comes to it, that's not what he saw basketball be. And I completely get that. But I also understand that Greg Popovich's team shoot 3-pointers. Do you know what I mean? They're chucking up threes and they're going to have to chuck up threes. And realistically, had they perhaps doubled down on that earlier on, they might not have had the decline that they had at that particular stage. I mean, he seems to be obsessed with guys who can hit long range twos even to this day. And it's just like, my man, get him to take a meter step back. And so even if he doesn't believe in analytics, right, he has to coach against it. He has players who will be going, I should be, if I want to get a bigger deal, I need to shoot more threes. I don't know if this is still the case, but a couple of years ago, I think the offensive rebound percentage went down for a little while. I'm not sure if it's gone back up again, but it went down for a little while because everyone was on the perimeter. You didn't have players in. And I think that they've worked out now that actually, if you see someone about to shoot and you bolt in, because the balls rebound further for 3-pointers, you can still get them. But, when I grew up playing watching basketball, guards didn't get many rebounds. And now it seems that guards get a lot more rebounds. And I think it's because the ball goes further and you can swoop in on it. It doesn't matter if Pop believes in any of that because it's happening. Do you know what I mean? So to a certain point, you sort of have to do that. So I dealt with a coach at one stage who he would tell players, if you hit a boundary, next ball you should hit a single. And I was like, no, if you hit a boundary, the next ball you should hit a bigger boundary. You should destroy this bowler so they can't come back on again later. So it screws up the other team. Also, if you hit a boundary from a good cricket shot, from something that's in your favor, you have a good matchup. You being at the other end, leaning on your bat is the absolute worst possible scenario for me as an analyst. I had a very good conversation with another cricketer where I was just like, you played out this over where you faced 2 balls of an off spinner and the other guy faced 4 balls of the off spinner, and he averages a run a ball and you average almost 2 runs a ball. Why are you letting him face a ball? I don't need him to face any balls. Stand at that end. And he's like, it's the 12th over. I'll look like an idiot if it doesn't work. And I said, I don't care. If you face 20 balls of this off spinner, they're not even going to bowl him for 24 balls because they're going to be so petrified of you. And I said, if you miss it one to mid on and take a single, that's my worst case scenario. You blocking a good ball of his and staying on strike for the next ball is better. It's getting through, but it's very new in cricket, way newer than basketball.
Right.
And we don't have as good analytics as basketball and baseball and soccer and NFL and those sorts of sports have. Also, cricket is a harder sport to analyze because the pitch doesn't care about your analytics.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are little things out there that you have to do, but you have to find a way to connect with people on a very human level. So I know the players who are going to feel awkward about being told something. So I just sit in the bar or in the lobby with my laptop open, and they come over to say hi, and they, oh, what are you looking at? And I just pretend I was looking at something. Oh, so it's funny because you're on this list actually. Oh, what list is that? Oh, have a look. You're one of the bowlers who's bowled the least around the wicket to left-handed. And you get smashed for 9 runs and over when you bowl a left-handed from over the wicket. Maybe I should bowl around the wicket more. Maybe you should. So, you know, those conversations you probably won't have to have. There's a really good article. I can't remember if it was Zach Lowe or someone else wrote a really good article about Donovan Mitchell when he was at, when he first got drafted, maybe about half a year into his career. I've been really fascinated with him since then. And they broke down what the development staff would do at the end of each game with him.
Okay.
And you're just like, that's the dream. That's the relationship you want to be able to say to this guy, look, we know you can be really good. These are the things that you need to work on every single game. And I've had little relationships like that. Like I had a couple of meetings with Shan Masood where I've talked him through his game, but only once or twice. And he works with a lot of different analysts. And now I think he's with the CricViz guys. So they'll be able to do that for him without the need for him. But the ability to have someone just come up to me and go, I've read your stuff. I understand that you're coming at this from a completely different area. I haven't been successful so far. Take me through why you think that is, and be able to go bang, bang, bang. This is what I think you should look at. This is where I think you made your mistakes. This is the kind of player I think you can become. This is how I think you can get there. Take this to your coaching, your coaches, and see what they can do with this information. How you can mesh that together with a technique. That's kind of what you want. I probably had that with maybe 5-6 players over the time. With coaches, it just depends. Most of my jobs are in the middle of a tournament. Coaches is, it's a bit like an NBA season. There's only so much you can do. I've got to prepare. I've got to prepare the bowlers. I've got to prepare the captain. I've got to review the last game. Sometimes I've got to prepare the batsman, depending on what kind of bowling attack we're going up against. Being able to go up to the coach and say, can I have an hour of your time so we can take this guy aside? And he's just like, you're right, but I can't deal with it now.
Right.
And then as an analyst, I've then got to make sure we have the right kind of net bowlers bowling. We have to have our players bowling to the kind of plans in the nets that we want them to, because these are the plans they're going to have to bowl to the guys in the game. All those sorts of things. And you just run out of energy. So quite often in the tournaments I've been in, it's just that I'm doing an analyst job, which in an NBA team would be done by 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. And I'm on my own. Plus, I've got to go and get my lunch because I'm in Dubai and the hotel I'm in is charging $30 and I'm on an ICC stipend, and all those sorts of things happen in a way. So it's a completely different kind of system. But when I hear things like, oh, that coach doesn't believe in analytics, I'm just like, mate, whether you believe in them or not, it's, I don't believe that religion works, but I definitely believe that religion has a big impact on the world. And I kind of think of it that way.